Picture this. A candle flickers inside the royal chamber of the Louvre. Behind its trembling flame, a woman in black. Her face pale as wax, her eyes sharp as glass. Outside, Paris sleeps. Inside, a queen decides who will die before dawn. Her name is Catherine de' Medici, the Italian-born queen who ruled France from the shadows. To the world, she was the devoted widow of King Henry II. To those who truly knew her, she was something far more dangerous. A master of deception, a woman who turned love into a weapon and power into art. They called her the Black Queen. They whispered she kept poison hidden in her rings, that her perfume could kill. And that no man who shared her bed ever lived long enough to boast about it. But who was she, really? A monster, or a survivor in a world where men ruled with swords? And women ruled with secrets? Catherine was born in 1519, in Florence, a Medici by blood, yet cursed from birth. Her mother died within weeks, her father soon after. The infant was left to the mercy of relatives who saw her not as family, but as a pawn in the chess game of Italian politics. When war swept through Florence, the Medici were driven out. Catherine, barely 10 years old, was taken hostage by enemy forces. For 2 years she lived behind convent walls. Fed by nuns, guarded by soldiers who debated whether to kill her. She learned young that survival was not about strength. It was about silence. About watching, waiting, listening. And striking only when no one expected it. When peace finally came, she was rescued by her uncle, Pope Clement VII. He saw in her not a helpless girl, but a perfect political instrument. At 14, Catherine was married off to Prince Henry of France, the second son of King Francis I. A Medici in the French court, a foreigner in a nest of snakes. The wedding was magnificent. Silks from Venice, gold from Florence, banquets that lasted for days. But when the music ended, the whispers began. The bride was plain. The groom indifferent. And his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, a woman twice his age, already ruled his heart. For 10 long years, Catherine lived like a ghost in her own palace. Ignored by her husband, mocked by courtiers, childless and powerless. She walked the halls in silence. Memorizing faces, secrets, weaknesses. While others played with passion, she studied survival. Then fate shifted. In 1544, after years of humiliation, she gave birth, not to 1 child, but to 10 in total. Each a potential heir to the French throne. Each a weapon she would one day wield. When King Francis I died and her husband became King Henry II, Catherine rose, not with joy, but with calculation. Diane de Poitiers still held Henry's affection. But Catherine held something more dangerous. Knowledge of every man and woman who sought to control him. She learned who was loyal. Who lied. Who could be bribed, or blackmailed. The same girl who once knelt before nuns now knelt before no one. In 1559, Paris celebrated peace between France and Spain. King Henry insisted on a jousting tournament, a symbol of chivalry and triumph. But as the sunlight glinted off his armor, Catherine watched with dread. Moments later, a splintered lance pierced the king's eye. Blood streamed down his face. And France's destiny shifted forever. Henry II died slowly, screaming. While Diane de Poitiers was banned from the court by Catherine's first command as queen. She had waited 25 years for that moment. And she did not waste it. The widow dressed in black from that day forward. Not for grief, but for power. With her son Francis II crowned king at 15, Catherine became regent in all but name. The French court, once filled with laughter, turned cold. Doors closed quietly, guards vanished at night. Enemies who had mocked her began to disappear. Some died of illness. Others simply never woke up. And behind it all, rumors whispered of a secret chamber. A room filled with vials, powders, and locked cabinets. They said Catherine kept a cabinet of poisons. That she tested them on prisoners. That her Italian perfumers were not makers of scent, but masters of death. No one could prove it. But no one dared ask twice. Her lovers, they said, died in their sleep. Her rivals choked on their wine. Even her own daughter, sent to marry a foreign king, wrote that, "My mother's kisses taste of death." Was it true? Or was Catherine simply the perfect villain for a world terrified of powerful women? Paris. 1560, the air was thick with the smell of burning incense, and fear. The boy King Francis II sat trembling on the throne. His mother, Catherine de Medici, standing behind him like a shadow he could never escape. He was only 15, weak, sickly, and terrified of his own court. She was 41, and had waited her entire life for this moment. France was bleeding from within, Protestants and Catholics tearing the country apart. Nobles scheming for the crown. And whispers of rebellion rising in every province. And through it all, Catherine smiled. Calm. Cold. Calculating. Like a spider in the center of a trembling web. She began with charm. She hosted banquets and masquerades, inviting her enemies to dine at her table. She poured their wine, listened to their gossip, and memorized every secret they carelessly let slip between bites of roasted pheasant. But beneath the music and laughter, spies moved through the corridors of the Louvre. Catherine had turned her ladies-in-waiting into eyes and ears. Her servants into messengers of deceit. They carried more than trays, they carried whispers, notes, and sometimes, poison. Historians would later call it the Flying Squadron. A group of beautiful women trained to seduce noblemen, extract their secrets, and deliver them to the Queen Mother. It was not a harem. It was a weapon. Men fall, Catherine once said, not by swords, but by smiles. But all her cunning couldn't save her first son. In December 1560, King Francis II collapsed. His body frail, his skull swollen with infection. Doctors blamed an abscess behind his ear. Others whispered of poison. Catherine wept at his funeral. But few believed her tears. They said she wanted him gone. Because his young wife, Mary, Queen of Scots, held too much influence. With Francis dead, Catherine's grip on power would tighten once again. And it did. Her next son, Charles IX, was only 10. Too young to rule. So the council declared Catherine regent of France. For the first time, she didn't need to hide behind her husband or her children. The throne, though not hers by right, was hers in reality. She became the true ruler of France. A queen without a crown, yet more feared than any king. In the years that followed, France became a stage. And Catherine, its master director. Every ball, every marriage, every treaty. A performance of loyalty hiding a deeper betrayal. She arranged marriages between Catholic princes and Protestant nobles, pretending to unite the realm, while secretly ensuring that neither side ever trusted the other completely. She would smile at the Protestant leader Admiral Gaspard de Coligny one day, and dine with the Catholic Duke of Guise the next. Both believed she was on their side. Both were wrong. Her goal was not peace. It was balance, a fragile balance where only she could decide who lived or died. And then came the lovers. Catherine's court was a labyrinth of silk and sin. She surrounded herself with beauty. Young poets, soldiers, courtiers whose faces could melt hearts and start wars. She offered them power, affection, and sometimes, herself. Not out of desire, but out of strategy. Every lover was a pawn, and every romance was a test of loyalty. Those who spoke too freely about her private life were found dead within weeks, drowned, poisoned, or vanished without trace. The Duke of Guise once boasted he had tamed the Italian widow. Days later, his wine turned black in the glass. He never drank again. Did Catherine truly kill them all? Perhaps not with her own hands. But in a court ruled by fear, her silence was deadlier than any blade. Catherine's fascination with poison was more than rumor. Her Florentine heritage had introduced her to apothecaries who could craft death like perfume. She built secret laboratories beneath the Louvre, stocked with powders and tinctures that could mimic disease. Some said she owned a book of poisons, a handwritten guide describing every known method to kill without leaving a trace. Others claimed she tested them herself, watching prisoners convulse through the keyhole of a locked door. Whether true or not, the legend was enough to keep even her allies trembling. Because when Catherine smiled, you could never tell if it was mercy, or farewell. By the 1570s, her sons had grown into men. But they were men molded by her shadow. Charles IX was paranoid and unpredictable, haunted by dreams of blood and ghosts. Henry, the future King Henry III, was beautiful, manipulative, and cruel. His mother's reflection in male form. France itself mirrored their corruption. The wars between Catholics and Protestants turned into massacres. The streets of Paris ran red with blood. And the name Medici became a curse whispered through clenched teeth. And yet, Catherine remained calm, unmoved, watching her kingdom burn as if the flames were part of her design. Because for her, power was not about peace. It was about control. And she would rather rule over ashes than be ruled by men. Paris, August 1572. The bells of Notre Dame rang like a heartbeat. Slow. Relentless. Each chime echoing across narrow streets heavy with tension and sweat. It was supposed to be a celebration, the royal wedding between Marguerite de Valois, Catherine's daughter, and Henry of Navarre, the Protestant prince who would one day become Henry IV of France. A union meant to bring peace after decades of religious war. But peace was never what Catherine wanted. She wanted control. And control, she had learned long ago, is easier to keep through fear than through love. Paris overflowed with nobles. Thousands of Protestant guests poured into the Catholic city, filling inns, palaces, and taverns with laughter and suspicion. Catherine watched from her window, a widow draped in black, her face unreadable as chess pieces moved below her. At the ceremony, she stood beside her son, King Charles IX, whose restless eyes betrayed a heart already breaking under the weight of the crown. He smiled for the crowd, but his hand shook as he placed it on his sword. Even as bells rang and music filled the air, Catherine whispered to her advisers. There were too many Protestants. Too many armed men. If they turned on the king, it would be the end of the Valois dynasty. Or so she claimed. But those who knew her feared something far darker was brewing. Days after the wedding, the Protestant leader Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, once Catherine's supposed ally, was shot in the street. The bullet tore through his arm, nearly killing him. He survived. And his followers, enraged, demanded justice. Catherine visited him at his bedside, her face soft with sympathy. She promised the king would investigate. She held his hand, and in that moment, her eyes gleamed like a knife. That night, witnesses claimed she met secretly with the Duke of Guise, the very man whose family despised Coligny. And from that meeting, the plan was born. August 23, 1572. Midnight. The streets of Paris were silent, too silent. Behind closed doors, soldiers waited for the signal. A bell from the palace tower. Catherine's chamber was lit by a single candle. She sat beside her trembling son, Charles IX, whispering that the Protestants planned to kill him. That he had to strike first, or die like his father. The boy king finally broke. He shouted, "Kill them all. Kill them all so that none can accuse me later." And Catherine, calm and composed, blew out the candle. The bell began to ring. What followed was no battle, it was slaughter. Doors kicked open. Men dragged from their beds. Women and children cut down as they screamed prayers into the smoke. For 3 days and nights, Paris became a river of blood. Bodies piled in the gutters, the Seine turned red. Even Coligny, wounded and helpless, was thrown from his window. His corpse mutilated and paraded through the streets. And above it all, from the palace window, Catherine watched, her black veil fluttering in the warm summer wind, her face expressionless. When morning came, she ordered the corpses cleared before dawn, so that the sun would rise on a peaceful Paris once more. More than 10,000 Protestants were murdered across France in the weeks that followed. Catherine sent letters to neighboring provinces urging necessary purges. The message was clear: dissent would be drowned in blood. Foreign ambassadors recoiled in horror. Even the Pope, though publicly praising the victory over heresy, privately admitted that the brutality had shaken Christendom. Catherine became both feared and cursed. In Spain, they called her the Jezebel of France. In England, the Italian witch. And in her own court, behind closed doors, her children began to fear her more than any enemy. Her son Charles IX, tormented by guilt, suffered hallucinations of ghosts clawing at his throat. He would wake screaming, "Blood! Blood! They're drowning in blood!" Catherine ordered priests to pray over him day and night. But prayers could not cleanse what she had created. When Charles died in 1574, some said from tuberculosis. Others whispered from madness. Catherine once again placed a crown on the head of another son, Henry III. She had survived 3 kings, 3 reigns, and 1,000 deaths. And yet her power remained absolute. Every decision passed through her hands. Every betrayal carried her scent. But even queens grow old. And in her final years, Catherine would learn the one truth she had denied all her life. That power cannot protect you from ghosts. Not the ghosts of enemies, but of those you loved. And those you killed. The palace had grown colder. Gone were the feasts, the music, the perfume of roses. Now the corridors of the Louvre smelled of incense and sickness. Catherine de Medici, once the most feared woman in Europe, walked those halls wrapped in mourning black, surrounded only by silence and ghosts. Her son Henry III sat on France's throne, jeweled, elegant, and reckless. He adored luxury and masquerades, not politics. He called himself God's chosen monarch, but everyone knew whose hands truly steered the kingdom. Even now, ministers bowed to the Queen Mother before they dared approach the king. Catherine's power was undimmed, yet something inside her had shifted. The poisoner had become the protector. She had spent her life killing for her sons, now she was fighting to keep them alive. Henry III was charming but unstable. He trusted no one, not even his mother. At night, he disguised himself and wandered Paris in velvet masks, watching the same people who cursed his name by day. Catherine tried to guide him, to temper his vanity, to secure heirs, to rebuild France after the bloodshed of Saint Bartholomew. But her words, once law, now met defiance. The son she had made a king no longer wanted to be ruled by her. Still, she refused to let go. She arranged alliances, negotiated with rebels, and summoned her youngest son, the Duke of Anjou, to strengthen the dynasty. He died suddenly on his way to Paris. Whispers followed, another Medici death, another mother's hand. Catherine said nothing. But those who saw her kneeling beside the coffin swore she whispered in Italian. Non c'è più niente da salvare. There is nothing left to save. By the late 1580s, France was collapsing again. The Catholic League, led by the powerful Duke of Guise, demanded the crown reject any Protestant successor. But Catherine, ever the pragmatist, opened secret talks with Henry of Navarre, the same man who had survived her massacre years before. She believed peace was worth betrayal. The League believed betrayal was worth her death. In December 1588, during a royal council at Blois, Henry III ordered the guards to strike down the Duke of Guise in his own chamber. When the news reached Catherine's bedside, she closed her eyes and whispered only. Too late, always too late. The killing sparked riots across France. The queen who had once orchestrated every death now watched chaos unfold beyond her control. Her own web had finally begun to strangle her. By January 1589, Catherine was 70 years old. Her body swollen, her lungs failing, she stayed in the Château de Blois, half palace, half prison. She asked for her confessor, then for her mirrors to be covered. The woman who had once ruled with beauty and terror could not bear to see her reflection. Henry III came to her chamber one last time. She told him, voice thin as paper. Promise me you will make peace. Promise me France will not die as I have lived, by poison and pride." He kissed her hand. She smiled faintly, the same cold, knowing smile that had frightened kings. "Remember, my son," she whispered. "They will curse you for what I have done. But you will survive because of it." She was wrong. 6 months later, Henry III was assassinated by a fanatic monk. Her dynasty died with him. When the court opened her chamber after her death, they found drawers of letters written in cipher, vials of strange powders, and a locked chest labeled, "For my son's safety." Inside were jewels, and a single silver ring set with a drop of darkened glass. The poison ring of legend. Her enemies claimed she was burning in hell. Her admirers called her the savior of France. The truth lies somewhere between. In the shadow she left over every monarch who followed. Catherine de' Medici had ruled for nearly 30 years without ever wearing a crown of her own. She outlived her lovers, her rivals, and her kings. And even now, centuries later, her name still tastes of perfume, blood, and power. Because Catherine was not born evil. She was made by a world that taught women to survive by any means necessary. And she mastered it. Night had fallen over the Seine. The palace windows glowed faintly against the winter fog. And somewhere in the bowels of Paris, a scribe copied the last letter of Catherine de' Medici. A letter never sent, addressed to the next Queen of France. No one knows what became of that parchment. Some say it was burned by priests. Others whisper it was hidden among the Medici archives in Florence. But its words, they say, spoke of warning, not pride. "Do not love as I did," it began. "For love is a chain, and power is the hand that forges it." After Catherine's death, Europe exhaled, but not in relief. Rather, in superstition. Pamphlets spread across France depicting her as a witch, a poisoner, a woman who kept demons in glass jars. One chronicler claimed she could speak to the dead. Another swore she turned the moon red with her curses. The truth? Catherine was no sorceress. But men of her time could not imagine a woman ruling without dark magic. They needed her to be a monster. Because the alternative was far more terrifying. That a woman, through intellect and patience alone, could command empires. And so history painted her in venom and ink. Her black gowns became symbols of mourning and sin. Her love for astrology, evidence of witchcraft. Her Italian accent, proof of corruption. But behind those myths lived a woman who had lost everything and everyone. And had built a kingdom from ashes simply to survive. The most scandalous stories, of course, were about her lovers. Did Catherine truly kill them? Or were those tales born from envy, the easiest weapon against a powerful widow? One rumor spoke of a soldier who vanished after sharing her bed. Another, of a poet whose heart stopped the night he compared her eyes to obsidian. And yet, no records ever proved a single murder. What did exist, however, was far more unsettling. A list found among her papers, names of men, each marked with a symbol. Some with a cross. Some with a flame. Some with nothing at all. Historians still argue what it meant. Lovers? Enemies? Potential threats? Whatever it was, one thing is certain. Every man who betrayed her lost everything: power, titles, or life itself. Because for Catherine, affection was never separate from strategy. To love her was to gamble with destiny. To betray her was to wager with death. By the time Henry of Navarre took the throne in 1589, becoming Henry IV of France, the Valois dynasty was extinct. But Catherine's blood still flowed through royal veins. Her descendants would sit on thrones from Paris to Poland. Her political method studied and repeated by monarchs for centuries. Henry IV, though once her enemy, adopted her tactics. Alliances through marriage, peace through manipulation. And the same iron smile when confronting rebellion. Even England's Elizabeth I, her rival in power and rumor, studied Catherine's letters and called her a woman of dangerous wisdom. And in the Vatican, priests muttered that she had turned politics into an art of seduction. For all their hatred, Europe never forgot her. Because in every court, in every throne room, there was always another woman in black, watching, waiting. Learning from the Queen who had rewritten the rules. Catherine's greatest monument wasn't a statue or a tomb. It was fear. Fear that lingered in every French monarch who followed her. Kings began to mistrust their queens. To see in every female advisor a whisper of poison. A trace of Italian perfume that might hide death. Even centuries later, when Marie Antoinette entered Versailles, nobles whispered, another Medici. A queen too foreign, too proud, too clever. And, like Catherine, destined to meet her own bloody end. Perhaps that was Catherine's final triumph. She had taught Europe to fear women who thought. Who planned. Who did not apologize for surviving. Visitors to Château de Blois still claim to see her shadow near the spiral staircase, where her laboratory once stood. They say the scent of bitter almonds, the smell of arsenic, lingers when the air is still. Sometimes, they hear footsteps. A rustle of silk. A voice whispering in Italian through the stone walls. Amore è veleno. Love is poison. And perhaps she's right. Because centuries after her death, Catherine de' Medici remains both feared and admired. The embodiment of beauty turned weapon. Of love turned vengeance. She did not simply survive history. She haunted it. The year was 1600. France had a new king, a new dynasty, and the illusion of peace. But the spirit of Catherine de' Medici still lingered in the marble corridors of the Louvre. In every sealed letter, every quiet betrayal, every marriage arranged not for love but for control. Her sons were gone. Her enemies buried. Yet her methods, those cold, intricate threads of manipulation, had become the blueprint of European power. Catherine had not only shaped her century, she had infected the next. Henry IV, the first Bourbon king, owed his crown to Catherine's chaos. He had survived the massacre she ordered, married her daughter, and learned from her that mercy without calculation is weakness. When rebels rose against him, he answered not with swords, but with the same poisoned diplomacy that once made his mother-in-law invincible. He bribed the nobles, seduced his enemies, and ended the wars with a whisper rather than a battle. It was pure Medici genius, repackaged in royal grace. Even his famous phrase, "Paris is worth a mass," was a ghost of Catherine's philosophy. Compromise, deceive, and survive. But in Europe's imagination, Catherine's legend had already twisted beyond truth. Painters began to depict her as a sorceress in flowing black, holding crystal flasks filled with deadly elixirs. Playwrights in London turned her into the villainess of every royal tragedy. A woman who ruled through lust, witchcraft, and murder. In Protestant England, pamphlets warned that the Italian queen had corrupted France with her pagan arts. In Catholic Rome, whispers claimed she had betrayed Christendom itself by consorting with astrologers and alchemists. No one could agree on who Catherine truly was. But everyone agreed on what she represented. The danger of a woman who could think like a king. And so the myth grew, until it became stronger than her life, outliving her body, her dynasty, and even her empire. 2 centuries later, when another queen, Marie Antoinette, walked through the same gilded halls, Catherine's shadow was still there. The courtiers mocked the Austrian queen as the new Medici, the foreign temptress who would bring ruin upon France. And they were right, though not in the way they thought. Marie's downfall was not poison, but perception. The fear of feminine power, born in Catherine's age, still haunted every woman who dared to wear a crown. In portraits, Marie posed in soft silk and pearls. But look closely, behind her eyes there's that same flicker. That same intelligence Catherine once hid behind her veil. History had not erased the Black Queen. It had replicated her. Catherine's letters, preserved in fragments across Europe, reveal a woman far more complex than her legend. She spoke not of sorcery, but of survival. Not of cruelty, but of necessity. A crown is made not of gold, she wrote, but of the lives you are willing to break to keep it on your head. She understood something no man of her time could. That power is not granted, it's taken, piece by piece, from those who underestimate you. In an age when women were expected to bear sons and keep silent, Catherine built a kingdom from whispers and fear. She turned manipulation into policy, espionage into diplomacy, and love into leverage. She was the architect of a new kind of rule. One that did not need armies to win wars. Centuries later, the reflection still holds. Elizabeth I of England, Maria Theresa of Austria, Catherine the Great of Russia. Each of them inherited a part of the Medici's invisible crown. They learned, as she had, that to rule as a woman meant being both mother and monster, nurturer and executioner. That mercy would be read as weakness, and ambition as sin. But they also learned that fear can last longer than love. And that history never forgets the women who dared to play its game better than men. If you visit Château de Blois today, you'll find her tomb beneath cool marble and flickering candlelight. Tour guides speak softly, their voices echoing in vaulted ceilings still scented faintly of dust and iron. Some nights, the staff say, a single candle lights itself in the Queen's chamber. No footsteps, no breeze. Just the flame. A reminder that some stories never truly die. Because Catherine de' Medici was more than a queen. She was a warning. A lesson carved into the bones of history. That power wears many faces. And the deadliest one of all is love. They thought her death would end it. That when Catherine de' Medici's heart stopped beating, her poisons would turn to dust. her spies would scatter. And her name would fade like the smoke of incense after mass. But they underestimated her greatest creation. Not her sons, not her crowns. Her network. Beneath the marble floors of the Louvre. Behind the gilded chapels and echoing stairways. Catherine had built something that survived her body. A circle of apothecaries, astrologers, scholars, and courtiers. Men and women bound by silence and gold. They were merchants of secrets. They traded information like others traded silk or silver. Every city, Florence, Rome, Lyon, Venice, had one of her eyes watching. Letters written in invisible ink crossed borders hidden inside music scores. Recipes for perfume masking formulas for poison. When the queen died, these couriers did not vanish. They simply changed masters. Some served the Bourbons. Others sold to foreign kings. A few, legend says, continued to meet by candlelight in Parisian cellars. Raising their cups to the Black Queen. Even decades later, diplomats would whisper. Medici gold still buys French silence. And sometimes, it did. In the years after her death. Rumors spread that her old laboratories in Château de Blois had been reopened. Villagers swore that at night. Light flickered behind the high windows. And the scent of burning mercury drifted through the air. Historians dismissed it as superstition. Until the 1630s. When royal guards raided a hidden chamber in the castle. And found notebooks written in a hand identical to Catherine's. Inside were diagrams of distillation vessels. Notes in Latin. And recipes that mixed medicine and murder. Among them, a chilling line. Per capire il corpo, by sona prima capire la pora. To understand the body, one must first understand fear. No one ever proved who had been using the room. But the handwriting, the calculations. They were unmistakably Medici. From those writings rose a new generation of manipulators. Alchemists who sold cures to princes. Perfume makers who brewed their loyalty in tiny glass bottles. Many claimed to be students of the Queen Mother. Some were charlatans. Others, terrifyingly genuine. In Venice, an apothecary was executed for attempting to poison a duke. With a scent he called essence of Florence. In Rome, a woman known only as La Signora Nera offered her clients love powders that killed within hours. And in Paris, courtiers began to whisper the phrase, Catherine's children, to describe those who rose by deceit rather than birthright. These were her true heirs. They didn't wear crowns. But they ruled salons and chambers with words sharper than daggers. They called their art la politique du silence. The politics of silence. A philosophy that could trace its roots straight to Catherine's throne. What Catherine created was more than conspiracy. It was culture. Her France had learned that beauty could be a mask. Loyalty a trap. And love the most efficient weapon of all. Wives learned to listen rather than speak. Courtiers smiled while planning their rivals' downfall. And kings, raised on stories of the Black Queen, began to mistrust every gentle voice that whispered too close. Even centuries later, her methods infected diplomacy itself. Assassinations dressed as accidents. Treaties disguised as traps. Politics, said one 18th-century minister. is nothing but the art of smiling like a Medici. Around 1660, long after her name had faded from royal decrees, a scholar in Florence discovered a small glass vial sealed with red wax. It bore the Medici crest and the inscription, "Non aprire mai." Never open. He ignored the warning. Inside was a dry residue of crushed herbs and metal salts. And a single note in Italian. Every empire needs its poison. No one knows who placed it there, perhaps one of her descendants. Perhaps Catherine herself. But the message was clear. The most enduring weapon of the Renaissance was not the sword, but the whisper. And no one whispered like the queen who killed her lovers. Tonight, in the Louvre's Hall of Kings, her portrait still hangs, pale, regal, unblinking. Tourists pass by, admiring the pearls at her throat, never noticing the faint outline of a vial painted in her hand. Under the varnish, restorers found traces of a different pigment. Arsenate green, the color of poison. Whether by accident or by design, it is as if Catherine left her signature there, hidden in plain sight, forever reminding the world that power never dies. It only changes its face. Centuries pass. The palaces crumble, the crowns melt, the banners rot. But her name, Catherine de Medici, still breathes between the stones of Europe. Her story does not end in the tomb. It waits, patient, like she once waited behind her veil. Because Catherine was never only a queen. She was a mirror. And when we stare too long into her reflection, we see the truth about power, love, and the darkness that binds them. Every empire since has followed her script. Leaders smile while sharpening daggers behind their backs. Alliances are sealed not by trust, but by leverage. Even in modern boardrooms and parliaments, her ghost lingers. In every whispered deal, every calculated apology, every kiss that means survival, Catherine understood something timeless. Fear lasts longer than affection. It burns cleaner, deeper, leaving behind obedience where love would leave rebellion. That is why her reign still unsettles us. Because deep down, we recognize her logic. We repeat it, century after century, pretending it was born from necessity rather than choice. Strip away the silks, the poisons, the throne. What remains is a woman who had been orphaned, imprisoned, humiliated, and who learned that gentleness is a luxury for those protected by others. She wasn't born ruthless. She was sculpted by fear. The convent walls, the jeers of courtiers, the indifference of her husband, all carved her into the creature history would call the Black Queen. She discovered that in a world ruled by men, a woman could survive only by mastering what they feared most: intelligence. Her genius was not in cruelty but in calculation. Every act of violence she ordered was, in her mind, a desperate attempt to control chaos. And perhaps, that is what makes her so haunting. The idea that evil can begin as protection. That love can become poison. When the world gives you no other weapon. Historians still debate her sins. Was she the architect of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre? Or a ruler cornered by forces she could no longer command? Did she truly poison her lovers? Or did men invent those tales because they feared a woman's ability to unmake them without a sword? Maybe the truth doesn't matter anymore. Because the myth has already done its work. Catherine's story outlived her because it speaks to something we all understand. That to hold power is to lose purity. And that every act of love carries the seed of destruction. In the great tapestry of history, Catherine's thread glows darker than most. It winds through Florence, Paris, and Rome. Through every court where intrigue outlasted faith. Her hands may be gone. But her methods remain. Observe, calculate, endure. She proved that survival is not about strength but adaptation. About knowing when to bow and when to strike. She turned manipulation into language. And language into legacy. The poets of her age wrote of angels and saints. Catherine taught Europe to fear something more realistic. The calm smile of a woman who knows exactly how much power she holds. And exactly when to use it. At night, when the Louvre empties. The guards say the gallery lights sometimes flicker near her portrait. A single flame trembles in the dark. As if remembering the hand that once extinguished it. Perhaps it's only air moving through old walls. Or perhaps it's her. Still testing the balance between light and shadow. She was the queen who killed her lovers. The widow who built an empire from blood and beauty. The mother who ruled through terror and tenderness alike. But she was also the woman who taught the world. That every crown sits atop a human heart. And that the heartbeat beneath it is never pure. The echo of Catherine de' Medici still whispers through the corridors of power. Her poisons are gone. But her lessons remain. Because in the end, history does not remember kindness. Only those who dared to rule it. This is not just history, it's a mirror of human darkness. Subscribe for more forbidden stories from history's dark side.